Right guys, little video for you today. Why the little things matter. Now, using VRS telemetry, which is this software here, you can really see how small little things can really affect your app time. Now, I'm comparing an app that I did, which felt pretty good at the time, against an alien driver, basically, someone who's really quick. And round Spa, in the Porsche Cup car. The Porsche Cup car is one of the hardest cars to drive on iRacing. It's rear-engined, rear-wheel drive, no traction control, rears going all over the place, and it really exaggerates the difference between myself, an average driver, I'd say. 2,400 iRating. I can hold my own, not the fastest, but do okay. Again, someone who really knows their stuff. So this is a guy called Josh Rogers, I believe, who does this VRS data pack. So we've used exactly the same setup, exactly the same track temperatures, everything is identical, apart from he's obviously much better than I am. So let's have a look at why he's better than I am, and how actually it's probably not what you think, and how small little inputs can make a huge difference into lap time. Okay, now so this is the classic layout, so we're going coming into Spa first. Now, if you haven't, if you're not quite sure what you're looking at, I'll try to explain it as we go along. But if you can't quite see the graphs properly, or you're not quite sure what the graphs are saying, just listen to what I'm saying and I'll explain it basically. So this is the classic layout, so we're coming into Eau Rouge first. Now, Eau Rouge is a slightly different corner than what you would, than your average corner, isn't it? You know, I mean, it's especially in this car. So this is probably more what you would expect the difference between an average driver and an alien driver to be. So as we come into it, I am lifting off the throttle, which is, if you can see my mouse, is kind of this middle one here. So I'm lifting off the throttle 10 meters earlier than him, and I'm braking up to 30% to get more weight on the front of the car. He brakes later at about 5%, and that's enough for him to get the car in. Whereas when I've tried it, I just straight line it. And this is all about weight distribution, just getting the weight onto the front of the car at exactly the right time, knowing when the compression ends, getting the car straight lined for the corner. Now, obviously he then makes up lots of time there, but this is the interesting thing here. This corner here is the biggest difference between us in terms of braking, in terms of throttle application, and I only lose 0.2. Okay, sounds like a lot, but you'll see later on when you're losing 3 seconds, well, 2.9 seconds of that, it's actually this corner here. I'm not losing that much. Now I do lose some up the Kemmel, obviously, because I'm losing a bit of speeds up there. So let's call it 0.4. Okay, but that's a very tricky complex, and that is one where there's obvious improvement to be had by just doing lots and lots and lots of laps. Okay, now turn 5-7 Lecombe, this is where you really start to see how the small things can make the big difference. Okay, so as we're coming in, you would expect that, oh well, he's an alien, he's probably going to brake later, harder. No, I actually brake later than he does. So looking at 10 meters difference. Okay, so I am the red line, he is the blue line. Okay, so I'm off the throttle later and I'm on the brakes later. And actually, in terms of brake trace, it's pretty similar. Okay, I hold the brakes slightly later than he does. Now here's where the difference is. This point here. So as we're turning into the corner, you probably can't see the arrow, but we're basically on the apex of the first right now. Now he gets on the throttle 10 meters earlier than me. Okay, so at this point we're exactly equal in the corner. Okay, but he gets on the throttle earlier, and that gains him 0.2 of a second just from apex to the turn in of the next corner. The fact that he's got on the power 10 meters earlier and got on it a bit harder. So as we approach the left-hander at Lecombe, our throttle inputs are pretty similar. He's carrying a little bit more apex speed, and so he gains another 0.5. And then on exit, we're quite similar. My throttle input is a bit steadier, as his is a bit more up and down, up and down. It's he's balancing the weight, and he gets on full power about 5 meters before me, which gains him another half a tenth. Sorry, not half a second. That'd be a lot, wouldn't it? Half a tenth. Now, that simple right, left, right, he's gained 0.36 of a second. So he's basically gained through this complex what he gained through erosion up the Kemmel. And yet our throttle and brake inputs are really similar, and I am matching him all the way up to the apex of the first corner. And in the heavy braking zone, I'm doing pretty much exactly what he's doing, if not better. So this goes to show you it's not about necessarily where you brake, it's the small things mid corner where he's gained all that time just by putting a bit more throttle on, just on the apex of the corner and on the exit of the corner, just carrying a slightly bit more speed. Again, on the throttle a tiny bit earlier has gained him 0.36 of a second. I mean, that's, you know, like you'd think maybe, oh yeah, if you can gain a tenth, 2 tenths maybe, but 3 tenths of a second just through those tiny little things. Excuse me. Now let's move on to the next one. So again, this should be a fairly simple corner. And if we look at the throttle data and the brake data, it's pretty much identical. We brake at exactly the same point, exactly within the meter of each other. The throttle comes off at the same time. The brake pressure, I brake slightly harder than him. So I'm up to 70%. He braked up to 63%. You know what I mean? It's small things, right? Braking's quite consistent. I'm actually off the brakes sooner than he is. But he is just carrying, if you look at this top graph here, he's just carrying a bit more speed. That's because he braked actually less than I did. So I braked harder. He brakes not as hard. So he carries more speed all the way in to the apex. So that's fascinating, isn't it? You know, when you think about it. And that has already gained him 2 tenths. 2 tenths because he braked lighter than I did. That's where you've got to think. Small little things make such a big difference. I mean, if you look at the brake track, again, I'm in the red, he's in the blue. There's not much difference there, is there? If we look at this area here, there's not much difference there, really. As we're braking. He's just braking less. And so he's got more speed. The lines are slightly different. Okay, so I actually make up a little bit. I make up about a tenth mid-corner because I'm able to get on the throttle earlier than him for that little bit in this bit. Then I have to come off again, whereas he's coming back on the power. Again, his line's slightly more arcing. That's something for me to work on, definitely. But very minor differences going on here. And that's 3 tenths of a second. 3 tenths of a second there. And, you know, this is where all the time can be made up. Through the corner with no name. Again, lines are slightly different. And in terms of throttle and braking, I'm braking later than him, but I brake harder than him by 10%. You know, 10% on your brake pressure wouldn't, you know, it's barely noticeable, basically. Maybe not for these great drivers, and that's why they're so fast. But, you know, I'm off the throttle later, on the brakes later, just a bit harder, and he basically is carrying more apex speed than me. But not much, 10k. Now I've tried going through that corner slightly faster, carrying more speed, and I can't get the car turned in. And this is all to do with the steering input. The way you can flick the car in, not lose the rear, whereas I would lose the rear if I did that. So again, small things, but because he's on the throttle on the exit here, he's on the throttle, what's that? That is exactly 7 meters. So he's on the throttle 7 meters before me, which in the grand scheme of things, when you're going that fast, isn't very much. But just by doing that, my throttle trace is very smooth. His again is a bit up and down, where he's just feeling the weight of the car moving. It gains him loads of time. It gains him, what are we looking at? A tenth and a half on that exit. So, yeah, like there's something to work on with the lines, but at the same time, it's the way that he is able to feel the weight of the car through probably years of practice and thousands of laps of experience with the car. He can feel when he needs to put the throttle on, when he needs to correct the steering side. If you look at his steering trace, on every single corner, it's far more erratic than mine. I'm holding the line, he's feeling the weight of it, and it's just, and that developing that feel and that almost telepathic ability of what the car is going to do next is what makes him able to get the throttle down much quicker. So if you look at Pujon, I only actually lose a 1/10.5 on here. Again, braking exactly the same point. If anything, I'm slightly later, but I brake harder, and that means that he can carry more apex speed. But if I was to try to carry that apex speed, I probably couldn't get the car turned in, because I wouldn't have that. If you look at the steering angle, which is this one, his is far more erratic, where he's flicking the car, getting it in. I'm smoother on there. So again, small little things make a huge difference. Look at Fagner's. So we go in again. It's very similar to Lacombe, where basically our braking is exactly the same. Mine's slightly harder. He carries a bit more apex speed, and that makes him 2/10. He makes literally 2/10 into the corner because he's braking less hard. It's fascinating, really, when looking at it. And then actually, I don't lose that much after that. The line is slightly different. Again, on entry, we kind of cross lines. So actually, yeah, it's about half a metre further into the apex on both the right and the left, which must help a little bit. We've got this quick right-hander, I forget what it's called. Again, he's slightly further over to the left-hand side as we're coming in. So this is what this line says. So he is half a metre. In terms of the throttle and brake, again, I'm braking slightly later, but slightly harder. And if you look at his steering inputs, they are way more erratic than mine, where he's just feeling the weight of the car. But he gets on the throttle. What's that, 5? He's consistently on the throttle much harder than I am on the exit, and that gains him a lot of time. Because actually on entry we're pretty similar. I lose 1/4 of a 1/10, but on exit I'm losing a 1/10, where he's just on the throttle that little bit earlier. Again, that's him just feeling the weight of the car. Turn 15 is very even. Turn 16 is straight. Blanchimont is a nightmare corner, but so here it's slightly different. So again, this is probably more of a red herring, because Blanchimont's kind of a bit different than a lot of corners. But again, it's small things. So I'm braking up to 36%. He brakes a maximum of sort of 10%. He's on it later as well. But I've tried this corner so many different ways, and I just cannot get it to turn. Either I lose the rear on entry, or I just wash out wide. And again, he can feel the weight. If you look at the steering trace again, I'm probably far too smooth on the steering. I'm just trying to come on, in we go. Whereas he's flick, 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 flick. It just different style of driving. I couldn't drive like that because I would just lose the rear. Because I don't have that telepathic ability to feel what the car's going to do next, because he's driven so many more laps than I have. Again, it's small things, but again, if you look at the throttle and the brake, we are way off on this corner, and yet I'm only losing 2/10. And this is similar to Eau Rouge as well, where in the fast corners you don't actually lose as much as what you think. It's the slow corners. It's the simple kind of right, left, right corners where you think, oh, if he's gained 3/10, it must all be on braking. It's not. It's all just that mid-corner apex speed, getting on that throttle in between apexes slightly more, and just slightly better exits. And it's amazing how much time can be gained there. Bus stop, again, same thing where you think, wow, all the time to be gained here must be because he's braking super late. They're not. Braking exactly the same spot I am. The line's slightly different. He's a metre further to the left, so that probably helps him. And on the apex, he is half a metre further into the apex than I am. But where he gains the time, I mean, it's... Again, he's carrying slightly more speed in the entire way. So he's the entire way, because he's carried a bit more speed actually from the previous corner, he is braking slightly later than me, I suppose, but the brake traces are pretty similar. And we don't really lose any time on the entry to the corner, but we're really losing it kind of mid corner in between the two apexes, where I kind of stab on the throttle a bit, whereas he's probably a little bit smoother and just carrying a bit more speed. Literally, so it's between, it's the entry into that left of the bus stop, where, I mean, it's not much, but because we're moving so slowly, like if you compare this to Eau Rouge or Blanchimont, you'd say, oh, well, I must be losing tons of time, because the traces are so different, and here they're so similar. But because the speed is so much lower, you're in the corner for a lot longer, and it just makes so much difference. I mean, I'm on full throttle earlier than him even, but it just... And after that, we don't lose any time at all. It's literally just between... All the time is basically lost between just before the apex of the right and just before the apex of the left. That's literally where I'm losing 3.5 tenths of a second. Just between those 2 points. Small things can make a huge difference, as we're seeing. Turn 1, lines are slightly different here. It's a bit difficult to judge. I tend to muck this corner up quite a lot, I'll be honest. So, again, in terms of braking though, I'm only braking kind of 10 metres earlier than him, I suppose. And the brake traces are fairly similar. I don't really lose any time at all. In fact, getting to the just before the apex, we're actually exactly level in terms of time, but he's on the throttle 5-10 meters before me, and has consistently higher throttle input, and that gains him 3.5 tenths of a second. All right for some, isn't it? Eh? So there we go. Hopefully that has helped you understand a little bit about where these alien drivers can pick up so much time, and how you can pick up time by focusing on the slower corners and not necessarily focusing on just the braking, but focusing more on apex speed, in between apex speeds and exits. That's so much more important than the entries to the corner. And sometimes actually not braking as hard into a corner can even gain you time. It's crazy to look at it like that, but small things, huge difference. If you're wondering why you're 3 seconds lap slower than someone, it's not because necessarily you're doing anything fundamentally wrong. It's they're doing the small things right. So hopefully this has given you some sort of insight into it. I'm still exploring the world of this VRS telemetry data, and it's absolutely fascinating to me, so that's why I thought I would share it with you. So yeah, if you like the content, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. I don't really care, to be honest. So yeah, where's my OBS gone? Nice little screenshot. That's my desktop there. Hope like that. Right, so anyway, thanks guys, thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.